Well, good morning. It's another Wednesday morning, and I'm so glad to be with you today. We have been talking a lot about some very complex things, and today we're going to continue with that, and the subject is duality. And when I was working with clients last year, some of my clients said they felt dark forces were coming into the society over here. And it began to lead me to think of the dark and the light. And lots of people are thinking of the dark and the light. There's so many books published right now about the dark and the light and in between, which is the subject that is leading to dualism. And I'm going to turn it over now to my guest, Stephen Daring, who has some ideas about duality of his own.
Well, okay, thank you, Carrie.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you for having me on your podcast. By way of a small introduction so that your listeners can have a little bit of a sense of my background. So I started off in politics. I worked in politics. I worked in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill. I got my master's degree in public policy from Georgetown University. And then later on in life, I got my master's of divinity at Baptist Theological Seminary in Richmond. I've always been fascinated by what moves people, by what motivates people. That also makes me sort of an avid armchair philosopher. I like to read the various works by some of the great philosophers. So we want to talk about dualism, right?
Yes, yes we do.
All right. Well, that topic, has a long and rich history. And so I'm going to start from a Christian background, a Jewish Christian background, simply because that's our tradition. That's what we grew up in. That's what I grew up in. But this discussion and this idea of duality has been around for a long, long time. It's addressed in Eastern religion and Eastern philosophy quite a bit.
Well, let me turn the air conditioner off.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to have the very same thing we had last time.
Oh, I
Let
forgot
me
about
start
that.
over.
That's okay. Well, just keep it running. He'll cut it.
Okay, he'll cut it, but we'll start over.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad we would have done the very same thing again. Okay.
Oh, yeah. It's a lot different.
It was a lot different.
Yeah.
And that's why I wouldn't post.
Yeah.
And let's see if this one in here is, I don't think that has anything to do with it. That one in there, do you?
No, I don't think so. That was it right there. That makes a huge difference.
Okay.
So hopefully that will take care of it.
All right, well, good morning. This is another Wednesday morning, and today we're going to be talking about another somewhat complex subject, and that is duality. And I would like to mention that last year, some of my clients said they felt dark forces were entering our society. Of course, that was during the COVID year. And so I began to be interested in the dark and the light, and many, many books I found had been written about the dark and the light. Many people are interested in the dark and the light and in between. And so that creates a duality, opposites. And we have today Stephen Daring, who has some views about duality. And I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself and to talk about your ideas.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Carrie. Just by way of introduction for your listeners, a little background. I started off my career in politics. I've worked on Capitol Hill. I've worked on several campaigns. I also have my master's degree in public policy. Later on in life, I got my master's of divinity at Baptist Theological Seminary in Richmond, and currently I work in the environmental sustainability nonprofit area. So I've always, had a deep interest in what moves people, what motivates people. And I guess I'm going to begin this conversation by referring to some texts out of the Hebrew Bible and the Christian text. That's the tradition that you and I are familiar with. There are many traditions out there. The idea of dualism, duality goes back a long, long way. you'll find that in Eastern tradition it's a lot less dualistic. So there's a little bit more openness to how things flow together. But a good place to start is in Genesis. If you'll excuse me, right off the bat, we're confronted with this issue when God commands Adam and Eve, and this is the second commandment in the Bible. The first being to be fruitful and multiply. They could eat of any fruit in the garden, but they could not eat from the tree of the knowledge of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's a very clear dichotomy. That's a very clear dualism. Of course, they ate from it. They took from it. They overreached themselves. They were tempted, however you want to look at that story, coerced, persuaded. But the ultimate end result was that they were banished from paradise. So they were separated from paradise. And so there's a very clear warning right there in the text about looking at things as if we can make that judgment ourselves. Now, I'm not saying there is no evil, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But that was very clearly reserved for God, to be able to make those judgments. What is good and what is evil? I think we grow up in a very individualistic society. Okay. So we make those distinctions between body and soul, between light and dark, between good and bad, between we or me and the other. And I think that when we start to do that, that is where that's the breeding ground for what we call evil. That separation from self, if you're looking at it in terms of the body and soul, and that separation from others. When we draw the lines and say we're good and you're bad, or we're the city on the hill and you're the evil empire. We create those false distinctions, and those false distinctions are present even in our everyday lives. One of the examples I like to use is the fish in the ocean. The fish is in the ocean, and the ocean is in the fish. You can't really draw a line there. Another way of looking at it is, our consciousness and our conscious awareness of the world. There's really no distinction. You can't draw a line between our consciousness and our perception of the things in the world. So, going back even further to the very beginning of Genesis, God is brooding over the face of the deep, the chaos, the darkness, but it is from that creation springs. God speaks it into being, and then there's lights, and so we have a division that we see between light and dark. But we experience light and dark. They're fluid. They flow into and out of each other every day, every night. So we have, the bright sunshine of day, and then we have the darkness of light. But
of night.
Pardon me?
Of night.
Of night, yeah. Darkness of night. And so there's if you look at that symbol of the yin and the yang, you see how that circle that goes down there, they flow into each other. So that's, I guess, the starting point. I don't know if you wanted to make any comment.
Well, I wanted to ask you, one of the things that I've heard you express is that the scriptures, the Old and New Testament scriptures, never really, from the beginning, made the separation of the dark and the light. Do you remember expressing that idea? Oh, yeah, no. So God divided the day, from the night. So we have that sense, but, it's really the light and the darkness flow and work together. Okay, there's a symbiotic relationship, and that's what I'm getting at, is the symbiotic, that ultimately we can't separate ourselves from anything, that we're a part of it. But we've grown to think of ourselves as very separate and distinct individuals. That John Donne poem, "No Man is an Island." But but that's how we think of ourselves, separated and cut off. But the ultimate reality of it is that we are not separated and cut off. So we create these artificial barriers. It's Paul that says, I think in Acts, God in whom we live and breathe and have our being. Yeah, glad you said that.
Same as, the fish in the ocean. We are dependent on, my reality is dependent upon your reality, just like, our reality is dependent upon all the other things and all the other people in the world. It's this one big reality that we are all in together. And when we start drawing lines, that's when we create the opportunity for evil, if we want to call it that, and conflict to emerge. Because mostly what we call it is evil, it's conflict.
Yeah. Okay, what I would like to do at this moment is to talk about my clients.
Okay.
The reason that this is relevant is that one of the things that I do with my clients is have them use expressive forms, either writing or art or various kinds of expression, to illustrate their life story, parts of their life story. And it includes the dark and the light. And some people say you're only as sick as your secrets. And I'm not sure I go along with that, but it is true that if you divulge about yourself some things that are of the darker side, that you have created a sense of clarity in your life. And along with that, I believe, comes courage. And courage is ultimately what my goal is for my clients, is that they develop courage. And when we have things that are separate, they often are hidden in a certain respect. And that leaves the client subject to secrets.
Yeah, so there's some great, philosophers have addressed this question. And there again, what we're doing internally is partitioning ourselves off. We're tearing ourselves apart and trying to separate it into, darkness, evil, bad, and good, as if goodness is the only thing that we can be.
Uh-huh.
That's the idea that's trying to be addressed in Augustine's concept of original sin. And I don't want to go too far down that path.
Okay.
But philosophers see it as, and they've written about this, is that being human automatically assumes that we are guilty. Now, what does that mean? What that really means is that we don't know, we're kind of thrown into the world, all right? We didn't choose our parents, we didn't choose the society that we were born into, we didn't choose our culture, we didn't choose where we live, we didn't choose our religion. We're thrown into it. And, it's, from there, we try to figure out, through trial and error, the best path forward, with all these conditions and circumstances and people and people's emotions and people's, their own sort of pathologies affecting how we make decisions. And because we live in a sort of a post-Calvinistic individualist society, we're made to feel as if all of that belongs to us individually. Mm-hmm. That's not how it's typically viewed in the Bible, that it's all of us together. It's not all of it, each of us individually, mm-hmm. It's all of us together.
Mm-hmm. Let me make a comment. Well, let me see if I can even remember what comment I was going to make.
I'm sorry, I'm being a little bit verbose.
I'll make it in a minute.
That's okay.
Go ahead.
No, that's okay. I mean, obviously, this subject is rich.
I remember.
Okay.
Talking about original sin. Now, that is something that you've all learned if you've been in churches. And many of you have, and a lot of you haven't. A lot of you have stayed outside of the organized religion, and I know a lot of my clients are of other religions. But if you have been brought up in the Judeo-Christian tradition, you have heard of original sin. There is a movement now called the Jesus culture. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's big. And in that culture, the idea is originally blessed. And that can be sort of validated if you look at the scriptures, because it was the Lord himself who said, become like little children. And in some of my work, I have the people that I work with pick out something that is something they had awe about as a child, and illustrate that with some kind of expressive means. And I think that the scripture says, if you become as little children, you'll have the kind of faith And that's an innocence. That's an innocence. It doesn't reflect born in sin. Just to throw that out, it's a bit of a controversy.
Well, yeah, and it's a really good point too, because we are born innocent. And I think, the sin is a very loaded word, and I think the concept that that comes out of Augustine and then the later philosophers, I think what it is that we try and we fail until we try and try again, and we may fail several times until we get it right. In fact, that's one of the definitions of sin in the Hebrew Bible, is missing the mark, as in archery. You're not perfect right off the bat. So, but going back to this dark and the light and the good and the evil within ourselves, you can very clearly see how it will split our personality. So we're fighting against ourselves instead of recognizing that we were figuring it out like everybody else is figuring out this as we go along.
Yes, that's interesting.